Mrs. Levinson doesn't get back for another week, and I honestly don't know if I can handle it.
You're gonna have to assert some dominance over it all.
Dominance? I mean, I don't think I can do that.
You're submissive.
I am not submissive.
Really?
Oh my god, you're so right. Lesbian is way better than straight.
Well, so are you ready?
Are you okay?
You should knock first.
What's that?
The opening scene of this film unfolds with deliberate patience and intellectual confidence, positioning itself not merely as a narrative starting point, but as a conceptual overture that signals the film's deeper concerns with power, recognition, and the emotional architecture of women's relationships, particularly within institutional spaces that demand composure while quietly eroding individuality. And by situating the interaction between India and Olive in a school after hours, the film immediately invokes a liminal environment where authority remains present but softened, where fluorescent-lit hallways echo with absence rather than surveillance, and where women momentarily step out of performance and into self-reflection. India's initial act of dismissing a lingering student is subtle yet symbolically dense, as it demonstrates her fluency with boundaries not as rigid enforcements but as negotiated gestures of care, establishing her as someone who understands that authority, when practiced ethically, does not require cruelty or spectacle, and this moment primes the viewer to read her later guidance to Olive not as domination but as mentorship grounded in lived experience. Olive's entrance into the conversation is marked by visible strain, and her confession that she does not know if she can handle the classroom becomes less an admission of incompetence than a quiet articulation of burnout, a condition that disproportionately affects women whose labor is emotional, relational, and often invisibilized, and the film resists framing Olive's struggle as a personal failing, instead allowing it to emerge as a rational response to a system that rewards detachment and punishes vulnerability. India's blunt assessment of the students as future elites insulated by wealth and entitlement widens the scene's scope, transforming what could have been a simple workplace exchange into a critique of how institutions reproduce power while relying on women to absorb its fallout. And this commentary resonates beyond the classroom, reflecting how women in many professions are expected to humanize environments designed to resist accountability. The concept of dominance, introduced by India with a mix of irony and seriousness, functions as a provocation rather than a prescription, challenging Olive's deeply ingrained belief that kindness and authority are mutually exclusive, a belief reinforced by cultural narratives that cast assertive women as abrasive or morally suspect. And Olive's immediate discomfort with the term reveals how thoroughly women are conditioned to associate self-assertion with danger, particularly queer women, who have historically been portrayed as predatory when they claim power or desire. The scene's dialogue carefully layers professional critique with personal revelation, allowing the tension between India and Olive to register as something more than instructional, yet never crossing into sensationalism. And this restraint is crucial to the film's ethical posture, as it honors the complexity of attraction that emerges through recognition rather than pursuit. Olive's insistence that she is not submissive, followed by her inability to articulate an alternative mode of authority, captures a familiar paradox in women's self-understanding, where internal narratives of strength coexist uneasily with behaviors shaped by social conditioning. And this moment invites viewers, particularly queer women, to reflect on how often their passivity has functioned as a survival strategy, rather than a reflection of desire or identity. India's response, perceptive without being punitive, exemplifies a form of mentorship that is rare in cinematic portrayals of women's relationships, one that does not rely on humiliation or rescue, but instead offers a mirror in which Olive can begin to see herself more clearly, and this dynamic resonates strongly within lesbian experience, where admiration for another woman's confidence, composure, or authority often precedes romantic or sexual self-recognition, serving as a socially legible conduit for desire in cultures that remain uneasy with women loving women. The film's refusal to rush this recognition, to name it prematurely or resolve it neatly, underscores its commitment to realism and respect, acknowledging that understanding one's desires is often a gradual process shaped by conversation, reflection, and the slow dismantling of internalized norms. The physical setting reinforces these themes, as the empty school becomes a symbolic space of transition, where the absence of students mirrors Olive's sense of dislocation, and the quiet presence of India suggests the possibility of guidance without erasure. And the film's careful attention to spatial dynamics highlights how environments shape emotional experience, particularly for women whose bodies and behaviors are constantly monitored. India's role as both authority figure and empathetic listener complicates traditional power dynamics, illustrating how leadership can coexist with care, and this portrayal challenges dominant cultural scripts that equate strength with detachment, offering instead a model of authority rooted in clarity, responsibility, and mutual respect. Olive's request to learn tricks of the trade operates on multiple levels, expressing a desire not only to manage her classroom but to inhabit her role differently, to reconcile her sensitivity with the demands of authority. And this desire reflects broader feminist and queer conversations about authenticity, burnout, and the cost of emotional labor, particularly in professions where women are expected to give endlessly without recognition. The scene's pacing, marked by pauses and unfinished sentences, allows these themes to breathe, resisting the urge to provide immediate solutions or dramatic transformations. And this restraint honors the reality that growth is often incremental and uncomfortable, a process, rather than an event, for women watching, regardless. Of sexual orientation, the interaction may evoke familiar tensions between likability and authority, between being perceived as kind and being taken seriously, and the film validates these tensions as structural rather than personal failures, situating them within systems that reward compliance and penalize dissent. For lesbian and queer viewers, the scene carries additional resonance, as it reflects how same-gender connections are often scrutinized or flattened, forcing women to navigate admiration and intimacy within narrow bounds of acceptability. And the film's nuanced portrayal allows these connections to exist without apology or sensationalism. The broader cultural discomfort with women's intimacy emerges implicitly through the film's insistence on seriousness and nuance, rejecting both erasure and fetishization by presenting a relationship that is meaningful precisely because it is understated. And this approach challenges dominant media narratives that either ignore lesbian relationships or reduce them to spectacle, insisting instead that women's interior lives are worthy of sustained attention. Symbolically, the school functions as a site of reproduction not only of knowledge but of social norms. And India and Olive's interaction becomes a quiet act of resistance against the expectation that women must either conform or fail, suggesting that solidarity and recognition between women can offer alternative pathways even within rigid systems. The scene's emphasis on looking, listening, and speaking carefully underscores the importance of mutual recognition, a concept central to queer ethics, where being seen by another woman can catalyze profound self-understanding without necessitating possession or declaration. By placing this interaction at the film's beginning, the narrative establishes its commitment to exploring lesbian connection as a site of growth, accountability, and emotional truth rather than provocation, framing desire as something that unfolds through dialogue and reflection rather than spectacle. The film also gestures toward the broader implications of this dynamic, inviting viewers to consider how often women are asked to diminish themselves to maintain harmony, and how reclaiming authority can feel both liberating and terrifying, particularly for those whose identities already place them outside the margins of normative power. India's calm confidence offers a counterpoint to Olive's anxiety, not as an ideal to be imitated, but as a possibility to be explored, suggesting that authority can be learned, adapted, and reshaped rather than imposed. And this perspective aligns with queer understandings of identity as fluid and constructed through relationship rather than fixed essence. The scene's refusal to pathologize Olive's softness or romanticize India's strength reflects a mature understanding of women's complexity, resisting binaries that pit vulnerability against power, and instead presenting them as interdependent qualities that can coexist within the same person. This portrayal is particularly significant in a cultural landscape that often demands women choose between being nurturing or authoritative, attractive or respectable, visible or safe, and the film's quiet insistence that these false choices can be dismantled constitutes a subtle yet powerful feminist intervention. As the scene concludes without definitive resolution, it leaves viewers with a sense of possibility rather than closure, inviting them to remain with the questions it raises about control, desire, and self-recognition. And this openness mirrors the lived experience of many queer women, whose journeys toward authenticity are marked by uncertainty and gradual revelation, rather than dramatic epiphany. Ultimately, the scene functions as a microcosm of the film's larger project, which is to honor the quiet resilience of women-centered relationships, to treat lesbian connection not as taboo or fantasy, but as a serious, ethically meaningful site of truth, care, and becoming, and to insist that women's interior lives, with all their contradictions and longings, deserve to be seen, respected, and explored in a world that still struggles to fully acknowledge women's love for women.